I must confess, we were always a little bit jealous for Estonians. They were always some couple, 1 or 2 steps ahead in their research and so on. So we have a good example to follow, to learn from, and also not only from successes but also from mistakes. So that's we have very fruitful discussion. Well, also around tour today around. So basically, how to say, they are because what standards they are oriented for. So these are, how to say, if to take into account ranking of publications, so the highest ranking. So not everybody of us were invited to write comments for recent paper in Nature. So Lehti was one of 2 of Estonian authors. So it tells anything. So after her postdoc studies postdoc work in University College London, so she returned to Tartu and organized or contributed very much to the organization of ancient genetic lab that we are also trying painfully to produce on and also following the same steps. And we're happy that she will present a paper that at first point would seem rather far, but from other ways, it's interesting, and also for various reasons, including for Indo-Europeistics, let's say so, because the North Pontic area, very special area, where, how to say, the crossroads or highway of Europe, there was steppe, and so, how to say, various cultures were coming and leaving, and so passing through, and each culture leaving own layer. So that's why it's a very fruitful and interesting area for studies itself. And of course, I think this is not exhaustive study. There could be much things to be done.
I have been in Tartu. Well, I am from Tartu, so I've been there almost my whole life. And I did all 3 layers of degrees in Tartu University. This was then mostly on Estonian demographic history. And then I went for 2 years on a Marie Curie postdoctoral fellowship to UCL, to the Molecular and Cultural Evolution Lab led by Professor Mark Thomas, and then worked on this Ukrainian material there. And now I'm already actually for some time back in Tartu, but of course these projects take longer than 2 years. So now, as of the very, very first days of this year, this work is also published that I will show you today. Yes, and already also this in the nice introduction, this was somewhat covered. So why study Ukraine? Exactly. The reason is that it is part of the huge Eurasian steppe, but also part of Europe. So half of it is steppe and half of it is say temporal Europe. And then it's a very interesting and important contact point between the steppe groups and between different European groups. And when we look at this in a bit more detail, then yes, there are influences from the east through time. Many different groups have migrated into Ukraine, starting with the Yamna, and then Scythians as a very active and important influence, and then all the way through actually to the medieval period, lots of migration from the east. But not only, there have also been several connections from the west, or several migrating groups. So the earliest, of course, early farmers who originated in the Near East and then spread into Europe and including Ukraine. But later also Southeast European groups, including Greeks, and even later Goths, also from the West. But of course, Ukraine is not only a place of migrations from other areas, but of course there's also local development. And I've kind of brought a few these important points here. So there's already in the late Bronze Age, there's this Chinets cultural circle, which is the background of new local developments. In the 3rd century BCE, there are first, let's say, mentions of probable predecessors of Slavs. And in the 5th to 7th centuries Common Era, we have the emergence of actual Slavs. And from the 9th century, they started their own state, Kievan Rus. And from the 16th century, only Slavs became the majority group. So before that, there were a lot of different groups living in the area. And this before that is what we will focus on today. And when talking about this study more specifically, then this includes 91 individuals. Well, from a very big time period, from around 7000 BC to 1800 CE, but actually, as you can see also from the timeline, there's only one this Neolithic individual and then a big gap. So actually we can say that the focus is on 1300 BC to 1800 CE. So still, of course, a long period and covering then Iron Age and the medieval period mostly, and a little bit of early modern period as well. And when you look at the map, then you can also see that there is coverage from most of Ukraine, but it is not really even. It's, let's say, a bit biased towards the east. And the reason for this is mostly because our closest collaborators, main collaborators, were from Kharkiv University. And of course, then main samples that they work with are from the West. But still, it's not solely focused, so we can still also say something about the more general area. Yes, and still to then stress that this project is then focused on these migrating groups more than the locals. So we are kind of already missing actually a lot of the local groups here. And so yes, for sure, there is more to be added still, but we are covering many of the different migrating groups, both from the east and the west coming into Ukraine, and also some locals. Okay, but so before we go into the population structure, then first there were also some interesting kinship groups that came out, some interesting relationships. So these were from the Scythians who built these mounds that you can see, kurgans, on the top right corner, where people were buried. And it was not a single person burial, but several people were buried in one mound. And we found one case where we have 3 individuals from the same mound who are all related to each other. And they are most likely a family, so a mother, a father, and a son. And also from this same site, where actually the total number of individuals that we studied was only 9. So already 3 are related, and actually 2 more were related to each other. And these 2 are most likely from 2 different mounds and are probably father and son there, but can be actually either way around. We're not quite sure which is the father, which is the son. And still keeping with the Scythians, another site called the Bilsk Hill Fort. Here it's an interesting case where again we only had 7 individuals from this site, or let's say 7 samples, and 3 of these samples were related. And 2 of the samples were actually identical. So they could either be from the same individual or from identical twins. But in this case, we have kept them as twins because, of course, we know that there are twins, and of course, there have been twins all the time. It's not something that is only happening now. So obviously, it's not something that is unlikely. And in this case, these two samples came from two different mounds and were excavated in different years. So the archaeologists are saying that it is very unlikely that this would be the same individual, or that there would have been a mix-up because they were like completely different parts of the collection and so on. And also then the third individual, who is first degree related to both of these, obviously identical ones, so is likely their father. This individual was from a third mound. So it's like a spread in this site of these closely related individuals. Okay, but now if we move on to population structure, then first of all, I wanted to explain a bit about this analysis. So this is a principal component analysis plot, and it's basically a genetic map, we can say. And each marking on this plot is one individual. And we have a modern background here, which are the three-letter markings. So maybe I will show quickly also with the, if I can. No, not really. Okay, so these dark gray three-letter markings are modern individuals. And on the left, we have European individuals. And on the right, we have the Near East, the Caucasus and the Near East. And so it works kind of west to east. And on the top, we have, so left top, we have Northern Europe. Then bottom left, we have Southern Europe. And top right, we have Caucasus. And bottom right, the Near East. So actually this west, east, north and south works geographically. So the genetic map matches quite well with the geographic map. And this makes sense because, of course, people mostly mix and have children with people who live close to them. So there's kind of this, let's say, more or less local mixing, and then you get these patterns which match geography. And on top of here, we have in light gray different ancient individuals. So again, on the very left, we have this Klein, which is not on top of any modern West Eurasian individuals. These are European hunter-gatherers. And again, so bottom is west and top is, let's say, east, north. Then we have, let's say, this post-Yamnaya migration Europeans on top of modern Europeans. And on the bottom, with Southern Europe, we have early farmers of Europe. And top right, we have also on this plot, actually East Asian and Siberian ancient individuals. And then Caucasus ancient individuals on top of modern Caucasus, more or less. And so on top of all of this background, we now have the individuals of this study, or actually of Ukraine, so ancient Ukrainians overall in colorful markings. And also modern Ukrainians in black. You can see these Ukr writings and the arrow pointing to them as well. So when we now start going layer by layer, then we can see how the genetic picture in Ukraine changes through time. So first, the hunter-gatherers of Ukraine. And so the Mesolithic is in brackets here because it's not really covered in this study, but just to go through it. So these individuals are similar to other European hunter-gatherers. And they're kind of intermediate between Eastern and Western European hunter-gatherers. Then when we move forward in time, then the early farmers of Ukraine, again, are similar to those from the rest of Europe. So they are similar, or it would be more correct to say that modern Southern Europeans are still quite similar to these early European farmers, including those of Ukraine. Then when moving again a bit forward in time, Then when we reached the Bronze Age, so these individuals of the Zrubna and Belozerska cultures, they are similar to these Yamna individuals from the steppe, but they have some additional European ancestry. So they are a bit shifted. And then these two cultures, Vysotska and Lusatian, I mentioned in this local development. So these are two local cultures. And these individuals are similar to other European post-Yamna migration individuals. So they are a mix of this steppe ancestry and European early farmer ancestry, with also some European early farmer ancestry in there. So, and you can see that they land very nicely on top of modern Ukrainians as well already. And then we have this one interesting individual. So these, now we are starting to kind of get hints of why Ukraine is special, because so far I was always saying the same as elsewhere in Europe, the same as elsewhere in Europe. So nothing really special, but now we are getting into the special parts. So this one Cimmerian individual is the first kind of hint of these eastern migrations. So this individual is genetically very similar to Western steppe individuals, so more towards the east. And conversely, already we also see a hint of these Western migrations. So we have these Thracian Hallstatt individuals who fall on top of modern and ancient Southern Europe. So they are more Western Southern European. So already in this first time slice, we see evidence of migrations or connections both towards the east and towards the west. But when we move on in time, we will see a lot more of this. But I also added a different kind of analysis in here, and this is actually, so I included the kind of official name of the analysis, but actually this is quite simple. So we are, what the analysis does is that it divides the genomes of the individuals that we provide in the analysis into ancestry components, and however many we say to do. So in this case, we are saying, please divide this data set, these genomes, into 4 ancestry components. And in this case, we are only using ancient individuals. So what we see in this big plot on the right is that first we have in red Siberian and East Asian groups who are almost fully red. So I will now, from now on, call this Eastern component. Then we have this kind of olive colored or dark green, which is frequent in Caucasus groups, and also steppe groups like the Yamnaya or Yamna. So this we will call the steppe component. Then we have light green, which is maximized in both Anatolian and Neolithic, as well as European early farmers. So this is the early farmer component. And lastly, the 4th component is this light blue, which is maximized in European hunter-gatherers, specifically in Western European hunter-gatherers, but we will call it the European hunter-gatherer component. And if we now look on the left, then these are Ukrainian groups of this time period. And you can see that these in blue markings in the legend, we have Mesolithic and Neolithic individuals. Those are also mostly blue in their genomic composition, so they are European hunter-gatherers. But if we look at then on the right again, these comparative groups, then we can say that they are kind of intermediate here between Scandinavian and Eastern European hunter-gatherers. And then we have early farmers in green, and also green mostly in their genome, so early farmer component mostly, and so on. And you can already see that we have kind of a mixture of these different genetic profiles. And this one Cimmerian that was Western steppe-like on the PCA has this red component quite nicely visible, so it's more Eastern than the rest. So now we're moving on in time, and I will drink it. So now we move into the Scythian period. So we are in early Iron Age, but looking at this Scythians as one block because they are especially well represented in this study. And they are also very heterogeneous. So first we have, let's say, like two big genetic groups of Scythians. One is, let's say, European-like or local. And this includes most of the individuals within this Thracian basis, which is also kind of European basis in archaeology. And they are from the right bank of Dnipro, so from Western Ukraine. But also it includes some individuals from other areas of Ukraine. Then we have the other main group, which is, let's say, the Western steppe-like group. And this has most of the Scythians from Eastern Ukraine, but also some from Western. So it's always, you have like mostly Western group is also genetically mostly Western, and Eastern the same way. But you have some kind of exchange between these groups, so they are not homogeneous. But then we have some interesting sites and groups. So first of all, these local elite archaeological association for these five individuals here. And they are from the left bank of Dnipro, but they have kind of much more Near Eastern similarities than any other Scythians in this project, at least. And then we have also these three individuals who are archaeologically characterized as nomad elite, so like non-local elite individuals. And they have a very Caucasus-like genetic profile. And now when we again look at this admixture plot, so it stays the same. This right plot is always the same, but on the left now you can see these Scythian groups. And you can see that they are variable. And mostly the variability is in this red Eastern component and in the blue European hunter-gatherer component. So how it's kind of, some are more European, some are more Eastern. Okay, so now we made it through this very kind of messy Scythian time, but it does not get much less messy, as you can already see on the right. So now we are kind of post-Scythian early Iron Age to early Middle Ages. And first, so there are known Greek colonies on the Black Sea coast at this time. And there's one individual here who indeed is archaeologically proposed as being Greek, and indeed is Greek in its genetic profile as well. And actually, I don't know if I can show. No, it doesn't really read. Okay, yes, almost. So there is another individual there in this dark blue, which is proposed as being Greek, but actually looks very kind of local. But to be fair to the archaeologists, both of these were with a question mark. So yes, one was Greek and the other was not. Then we have late Scythian individuals, but there are only three, so I wouldn't say that all late Scythians were Western steppe-like, but these three were. So we still retain this kind of Western steppe cluster that we saw already in the Scythian period. And then the next big culture in Ukraine after the Scythians is the Chernihiv culture. And again, we see that also this is not a homogeneous culture. Rather, we have several genetic subgroups, and importantly, these groups exist within one site at the same time with the same archaeological description. So these people should be the same, but genetically they are not. And here we can see two main clusters. Both are kind of, let's say, one is more or less local, the other is more Western or Southern European-like, has more of this Near Eastern component, as you will see also better in the next analysis. And then there's this one individual number 3 there, yes, which is even more Near Eastern-like. So it's really kind of drawn towards the right there on the plot, towards the Near East. And we will come back to this individual quite late in the talk, so I will remind you then. And then when we move into the early medieval period and look at the Saltiv culture or Saltovo-Mayaki culture, then this is also kind of a loose term culture. It includes several groups, including Alans and Bulgars, who have different burial practices in the kind of classical way of dividing these groups. But when we look at the genetic affinities here, then we see that both the Alans and Bulgars are divided into 2 genetic subgroups. And between Alans and Bulgars, there's no difference. So we have Alan-Bulgar group 1 and Alan-Bulgar group 2. So this suggested to the archaeologists as well that maybe it's not enough to use only these burial practices to determine if someone is an Alan or Bulgar. Maybe actually we have a different division, and maybe one of these genetic groups is Alans and the other is Bulgars, but of course we can't really determine then which is which, but it's more complicated, it seems. And as you can see, both are quite Eastern. One is, let's say this group 1 is kind of Caucasus-like, and group 2 is even more Eastern, like in the genetic profile. And so when we look at this period now on this admixture plot, then this is also what we see, that we have, let's say, a mixture of genetic profiles. And most noticeably, we have this Alans one and Bulgars one is very heavy in this steppe and early farmer components, similarly to other groups from the Caucasus. And Alans 2 and Bulgars 2 are very heavy in the Eastern red component. Not quite yet similar to really the Siberian and East Asian groups, but having a lot of this influence in their genome. Okay, and so now we move into the 4th and last section of time in this, only in this study. And this is later Middle Ages up until to the early modern period. And again, you already see that it still isn't kind of homogeneous. There are still a lot of different genetic profiles present in Ukraine. And when we go through in time, or let's say these clusters, first we have these nomad different groups, Kuman and Golden Horde individuals. They again are very Western steppe-like. Then we have the Nogai, who are known to have come into Ukraine from the east, and then later they left, and now they live in the Caucasus. So this is already a historical migration. And we do see that they, when they were in Ukraine, they did not become local in their genetic profile. They retained a quite Eastern genetic profile still, but even within that, they again were not homogeneous. They are kind of quite widely spread in this Eastern space between Caucasus and East Asia in this genetic map. And then when we get to the medieval and early modern Slavs, then we see again this local genetic profile. Of course, these are the people from whom modern Ukrainians come from. And importantly, let's keep in mind that actually they are not only similar to modern Ukrainians, but also in each of these 4 time slices, we had some individuals in that place. So this kind of, let's say, local genetic profile of Eastern Europe has been present in this area for actually thousands of years. And again, when we look at that mixture of this time layer, then we see quite a lot of this red. And so this very Eastern component, which is most visible in the Nogai. And again, I've divided them into 3 genetic subgroups. Already the first has quite a lot of it, but the third Nogai group is already still quite comparable to these actual Mongolian groups in the comparative data set, so very East Asian. But then when you look at this last column here in the Ukrainian part of the plot, then these are Cossacks, so they are the early modern Slavs in this study, and their genetic profile is very similar to modern Ukrainians. And so now we still have time. I've been quick, it seems. And we can go through also this third type of analysis, which is called QPADM, which is not important, but what it does is quite, as you can see, this looks quite similar to the admixture plots we have been looking at. And the idea is the same. You are dividing the genome into ancestry components. But in this case, we're not saying give us 3 components. We're saying, please put together these genomes from these 3 sources. And these 3 sources, or however many sources, but in this case, we have 3 sources. One is Ukraine Tripilia, which is an early farmer group from Ukraine. Then we have Ukraine Yamnaya, so Yamna, a steppe group from Ukraine. And then to represent this Eastern influence, we have an actual Mongolian early Iron Age group in here as a source. So non-local source. And you can see, so this is now all of the groups through time, so starting from the end of the Bronze Age and ending up in early modern period. And there's a lot happening, right? They are not the same. And we have already obviously seen this in all the previous slides, but also this analysis confirms it, which is always what we are after, right? We want to have our conclusions or results confirmed with multiple means. And again, kind of maybe most strikingly, you have some groups which have a lot of this light green early farmer component, like this Thracian Hallstatt ones from the very first PCA. So they are a known Western migration. Then conversely, we have some very Eastern, so in this plot purple, groups like these Alans and Bulgars, group 2, and the Nogai, all 3 groups, basically. And to make things even more complicated, so now we have, so this is the most complicated slide, I promise. Then we have the same analysis, but in this case, we are using different sources. So before we are using kind of very distant sources. We had these early farmers, steppe, and then this East Asian. So we retained the East Asian because this is anyway like just this far away, very Eastern proxy. But for the early farmer and steppe component, we switch them out with more close sources. So what we do is that we start with this Thracian Hallstatt. Oops, now I went the wrong way, sorry. Thracian Hallstatt again, which was then this, let's say, Southern or Western European-like individuals from the very first time slice. And alternatively, we take these Luzhitska individuals, so a local kind of local genetic profile group. And I won't go into this in very much detail, but what we can do is, let's say we have this green component then, and we can trace it through time. So we are going from this early Iron Age Ukraine into the Scythian period. We have this one Scythian group here, which has around half this green component. And we still see it, we can fully model actually these 2 Chernihiv subgroups, also still from the same Western source. So this is, of course, not extremely detailed. It doesn't mean that these are direct ancestors of each other, but they have a similar genetic profile. And when we look at this blue component, then we use first this, again, very final Bronze Age or very early Iron Age local group as a source for Scythian groups. And then we use one Scythian group as a source for this local Greek, so who was actually not Greek. And also moving on in time, we have kind of this blue getting lighter. So we keep taking one group that was, say, the source comes from the previous time period in blue, and then this group gets used as the source for the next time period and so on. So we can trace these genetic components through time, which is very nice to see. And we can do this both with the local component and with the Western component. And then we have some groups still who have a lot of this purple still, this Mongolian, which kind of comes in every once in a while with specific groups, but never stays in the sense that it doesn't become frequent in all the groups living in Ukraine, and we don't see it in Ukraine now. Okay, and then another topic, slightly sex-biased admixture, which I thought is also kind of interesting to show. So I won't go into detail in this analysis, but the important part is that we are looking on the x-axis, we are looking at the data from the X chromosome, which is in this comparison is more representative of the female lineage. And on the Y chromosome, we are looking at autosomal, so genome-wide, but non-sex chromosome data. And in this analysis, this is relatively more representative of the male lineage. So if we have sex-biased admixture that we have, in this case, what we can see is that we have most likely mostly men coming in and then mixing with local women, which then means that we end up with a higher affinity to early farmers who were the local layer in Europe when the Yamna, the steppe migration came in, mixing with these local early farmer women. And this makes sense. So this is for the Zrubna, but it has previously been shown for corded ware, which is another, let's say, product of the Yamna coming into Europe and mixing with local early farmers. And it has been shown for them before that it was probably mostly as men migrating into Europe and mixing with local early farmer women. And we see it as well in this Zrubna. And another example, so now I'm finally getting back to this Chernihiv 3, this one individual from this Chernihiv culture who was very Near Eastern, like already in this PCA. And indeed what we see here is that this individual specifically has a high affinity towards Anatolian and Levantine early farmers, not even European early farmers, but really Near Eastern early farmers on the female lineage. And it's very interesting that archaeologically, this site where this individual is from is the only glass production site outside of the Near East at this time period. So then the archaeologists were very excited, saying that this then looks like a direct contact, that this person has, female relatives in the Near East. They came, brought this glass production knowledge with them and started a glass production plant, let's say, in Ukraine. But of course, we can't make this direct connection with the archaeology, but it matches, and it's quite cool because it's the one glass production site at that time. Yes, and so we have made it through to the conclusions, which are, after all of this, loads of confusion and lots of heterogeneity, are quite simple. It is a lot of heterogeneity. So whereas usually when looking at most places in Europe, we would just be kind of going through this hunter-gatherer, early farmer, and then this after steppe migration, we keep in this, modern place in Europe. We stay there we don't have much happening. So we have these 3 layers and that's it. But as you can see, so this is all the time layers on one PCA, and they're all over the place, right? So it is all in Ukraine, but genetically it's covering Europe, well, let's say Eastern Europe, where it kind of should be, but also Southern Europe, we have steppe, we have even East Asia. So it's very, very wide in the genetic profile. And yes, importantly, there is often no cultural or social difference between the individuals with very different genetic profiles. But what we also see is a potential geographical structure in Scythians, so Western versus Eastern. So Western being more European-like, Eastern being more Western steppe-like. But as I said in the very beginning, the sampling is biased, so we don't have so many individuals from the East. So this is why this is potential structure, because we would need more individuals from the East to really confirm it. Sorry, from the West, sorry. We have a lot from the East, but we could use more from the West. Yes, and importantly, this, let's say, local Eastern European post-Yamnaya migration genetic profile is always there, even when we focus in this study on the migrating groups. Still, we always see this, let's say, local Eastern European profile in every time layer. We just also have a lot of other stuff happening around it, but it's always there. And with that, I would like to, well, thank everybody in Tartu, because this is how I got to do this project in the UCL, and where I'm back now again, happily. But of course, I want to thank MACE from UCL, very joyfully sending me off on that picture there. And of course, I very much would like to thank the Kharkiv University collaborators, Olga, who is now with us in Tartu, and then Stanislav and Irina, who are still in Ukraine. And it was an amazing process for me to see how they kept and still keep working, and were so excited to work with me, even though we had to wait for electricity to return to Zoom and all of these things. So they are just amazing. And of course, I'm very grateful for having this Marie Curie fellowship. And as I said, this paper was published on the 5th, I think, of January, and you can access it from this QR code if you'd like. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lehti. First of all, maybe there will be questions or comments from audience. Yes, they are already.
Hello, thank you very much for such a nice presentation. I just have, well, a question about the analysis. How many SNPs you used for the analysis?
So how many SNPs, yeah? So because most of the comparative data comes from the 1240K capture data set, or yeah, these labs using this capture produce a lot of data, which is why also my analysis here are limited to those. So it's around 1.2 million SNPs. And and this goes for the analysis with only ancient samples, which was then the admixture and the F3s, which were for this sex bias. But for the PCA, it's around 500,000 SNPs, because this is using, again, the modern genotyping chip dataset. So, yeah.
Thank you. Paul had a question?
Well, there are people on Zoom who also want to hear.
Oh, thank you. Right. So I was just wondering, you were talking about a group of people that was coming to Ukraine, not mixing really with the other locals. So I was just wondering, if you see this kind of genetic profile, how many people is needed that it really works for them to never mix and or if it has, for example, several migration waves that need to fit this input somehow?
Yes, so this is the tricky thing, I think, well, with most of science, but very much so with ancient DNA, that you can prove something that is there, but it's very hard to prove something that isn't there. So if we see that someone has mixed, then we know that at least this one person mixed, right? Or if someone has a new whatever, like haplogroup, we in Estonia, we have very important this male lineage connected to Siberia coming in. You see this, it's there. But if you don't see it, then it's quite hard to exclude it, right? So then we can never really work in absolutes. So I can only say that based on this, and the sample numbers are usually low. So I cannot say that they did not mix. I can say that based on, so these individuals that I have, they don't show these signs. And of course, the more you have, the better. But it's also, I mean, yeah, we have also in some cases done calculations to kind of say, let's say, well, but it's always very, very imprecise, because let's say you assume how many people there might have been, and then you can calculate what percentage of them must have been like this or like that, so that if you sample this many, then you don't see it, but it was still there. But it's so many layers of uncertainty, so it's really quite difficult to say. So I definitely cannot exclude any mixtures, but it wasn't very frequent, because if it was like most of them mixed, then we would already see it.
And so basically it could be also first generation migrants. If
Yeah.
So
yes, of course, that they could, and this is something that then we could test with strontium, for example, right? And which is something that we are kind of now doing also with Olga, who is in Tartu, and she actually has now this Marie Curie Ukraine project, and she's working with specifically Lispilsk hill fort, which had some of the relatives in the beginning. And she is also including strontium to exactly, then you can say if this was a first generation migrant, exactly.
I don't know. Can I just ask a second question, because you were talking about this mobility stuff? So basically you said you were sampling mostly migrants or the migrating groups, and now you mentioned the strontium. So it means the definition of this mobility was only based on archaeology so far.
Yes, yes, exactly. So this is definitely not mobility on an individual level, but mobility on a cultural group level, that we know that this culture originated somewhere else, and these people have moved around it. It's not on an individual level. Yeah. It's back there. 1 second.
So first, I think.
Thank you for your report. My question is why there were omitted the mention about the Rubinsi culture. So historically is one of the most known migrations. The Rubinsi culture representatives left a lot of archaeological sites in northern Ukraine. So is there any influence in the general genetic panorama or not? Maybe
So
why the Rubinsi is omitted? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So we did not have representatives from the culture, and so because and they, I don't think that any have been published elsewhere. So I really can't say if they had an influence or not, right? And often, of course, as you can see here, these genetic profiles are kind of not so specific, because with the data quality, or let's say resolution that we have, we can't go into very detailed conclusions in terms of this group contributed to the next groups or next generations. We can say that this profile persisted, but we can't really say if it's from this group or from another group that maybe came from somewhere close by and still had a similar profile. So in that sense, even if we did have these individuals, I couldn't really say if they contributed or not. But yeah, so we don't have them, unfortunately.
Thank you very much for your lecture. I wonder, you mentioned, you captured a very interesting thing about kinship relations in the burials where several individuals are buried. Are you expecting to do more analysis related to this? And do you have some examples where we can speak about a family, but with additional burials in the same site, in the same kurgan, let's say, of individuals which do not belong to this family? You know, so I think it's very interesting also in point of view of migration or mobility. It's a better word, I would say, maybe.
Absolutely. Yes, so this is something that I think is a very, let's say, hot topic and something that very interests also ancient DNA researchers now. But kinship studies, like focused kinship studies, are quite dependent on bigger sample sizes, because as you say, we want to know if within one kurgan we have only relatives or if we have also unrelated individuals, and maybe they are related to someone else in another kurgan. But this means that we need to sample all of them. And this means many samples, a lot of funding. And so this is something that we are kind of planning to do also in some of other projects. But currently with this material, or let's say with Ukraine, we, other than this Olga's project, which also is sampling more from one site. So she is obviously looking at kinship there as well. But from Ukraine or from this, let's say, material, I don't think that we can conclude if these kurgans were really family burials or not, over family kind of structures or not, because we just are not sampling everybody. But of course, even if we do, so this is what we and many people are doing in different sites now, trying to sample everybody. But of course, there's always the caveat that we can never sample everybody because of already like physical preservation, DNA preservation. So it will always, again, we can never be 100%, right? But we are trying to do these kinds of studies, but unfortunately, at least not right now, not on these sites specifically.
Questions? Just a few first. Well, first of all, thank you. I like very much your first conclusion. So, how to say, that is cultural and genetical heterogeneity in the same culture. So it means that, how to say, we should be very careful with, how to say, with normative approach towards culture, like one land, one Reich, and so on. So it not always it doesn't work, and so you nicely demonstrated. So if we had another kind of a vision, I just imagine. So how to say, we would first see genetics, then we would say, how to say, how diverse are the same genetic groups, how they are diverse culturally. If you would start from to see from this point. Another that I liked very much was gender-specific migrations and movements, and this also already noticed also, and it's quite universal, especially Yamna culture. So it's like male, probably males, like scouts moving and being like beginners. So it's a rather universal thing, so finally seeing how to say, not how to say moving all how to say all bunches of people, but how to say they consist of individuals with different patterns of behavior. And finally, concerning kinship, so it's very promising, indeed very promising. So we're just showing the structure, social possibilities to uncover social structure of populations, of societies, of communities, and so on. I should say that thanks to you to your lab, so we already have some provisionally the data of kinship also in our Iron Age one sample, and it's really how this it shows there are first grade, second grade, and so on relatives. So yeah, thank you. Are there questions from online listeners? No. So thank you so much. Thank the audience, and thank you so much, Lehti, for coming and giving us a talk.
And thank you all for listening. Thanks very much.